Are you looking for a homeschool curriculum that's flexible, engaging, and approved for Step Up for students? Let me tell you about Discover by Bridgeway Academy. It's more than just a curriculum, it's really a journey. Discover is designed for students in grades 1 through 8, and it blends colorful hands-on lessons with the flexibility homeschool families need. Whether it's language arts, math, science, or social studies, each subject is built to meet academic standards and, most importantly, spark curiosity. And it's all designed to fit your unique schedule. With built-in lesson plans, progress tracking, and online support, Discover takes the guesswork out of homeschooling. So whether you're brand new or a seasoned pro, you'll feel confident from day one. Now, if you're not using state funding, you can get 20% off with promo code DISFPEA20E at checkout. Visit discoverk8learning.com. That's discover K, the number 8, learning.com. Again, that's discoverk8learning.com to learn more and save today.
If you talk to people I went to high school with and said, hey, one day Steve Noble is going to host a nationally syndicated Christian Bible thumper talk radio show. And then one day he's going to teach hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of high school students from that perspective, they would have thought you were drunk or on drugs or something.
From the Florida Parent Educators Association, home of the largest homeschool convention in America, this is the Not by the Book podcast. I'm your host, FPEA Chairman Suzanne Nunn, and together we will hear from guests who share their journey to who and where they are today. Each one of them at some point left the expected path, ripped the page out of the book that says you have to do it like this, and made their own way. I hope these conversations inspire you as much as they do me. Today I have a great conversation with Steve Noble, founder of Noble U. We have such a great time talking about history, ethics, culture, truth, and how they all relate to the next generation. Along with, we talk about pouring into that next generation in a meaningful way. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Take a listen.
I'm the last of 4 kids, and there's 10 years between me and my eldest sibling, my sister. And so from their perspective, I was just the spoiled brat. I was the only one with red hair, and I got whatever I wanted. From my perspective, I was like, I didn't know any better. But I was a pretty happy-go-lucky kid. I loved Legos. By the time I was 6 or 7, I was really into World War II information. Some older listeners will remember this, like the Time Life book series. So I had a whole Time Life book series on World War II. I was fascinated by that. But what really tricked my trigger as a little kid was in 1979 when Star Wars came out. So I became this huge Star Wars fan, and I love that. But we also, another big thing, Suzanne, in my life is we live in Raleigh, North Carolina now. North Carolina is the 8th state I've lived in. So I moved a lot as a little kid, which if that's your context, you don't really think about it as a positive or a negative. It's just normal. But as I got older and then living somewhat of a public life and then radio and stuff, the fact that I lived in so many places, just like when I was in Orlando this past May for the convention, that's one of the first, have you always lived in Florida? Where else have you lived? And I've been able to connect with a lot of people just on that geographic. But I had a really great upbringing, traditional American values. My dad was 14 when Pearl Harbor happened. So I was raised by a member of the greatest generation. You know, you go to church, but I wouldn't say my parents were discipling me. But a pretty normal American upbringing, but a really happy-go-lucky redheaded kid.
I love that you mentioned the Star Wars. I mean, I can remember sitting in the movie theater and watching Star Wars and being completely engrossed. And I think, it's like, we know kids. I mean, my son was the same way. He loves Star Wars, but like to be introduced to it, like at the very beginning of it all, it was incredible. It was amazing, so
and it was so mind-boggling and so
it was
all-encompassing. I mean, by that Christmas, Star Wars came out in May of 1977. At that Christmas, I got Star Wars curtains, Star Wars bedspread, Star Wars sheets, and all kinds of Star Wars action figures. That was my Christmas in 1979.
Of course it was. Of course. Yeah, I mean, it just the way it impacted the culture is crazy. At that age, so you were thoroughly into Star Wars. Here's a curious question. Do you remember the bicentennial celebration in 1976?
Yes, I do. And the reason I remember it is because I was sitting on the back lawn of the Pentagon
Oh, wow.
watching the fireworks display in DC. My uncle on my mother's side was a full bird colonel in the Army. So we got to go there and talk about a fireworks display. Yeah, that was the bicentennial, the 200th anniversary of the nation. And I was in DC. Why did you bring that up?
That's so funny. Well, mentioning 77 and Star Wars being such a huge impact, one of my really most impressionable memories has to do with everything that was bicentennial. At our school, we were preparing
Yeah.
for the bicentennial, leading up to it. Even my school pictures that year had everything that was there related to the bicentennial, holding a copy of the Constitution. Like
Wow.
everything was like gearing towards that. And we lived in a small town. So I just so vividly remember going to the football field and having the big
Mm.
fireworks display and the parade in town. And it just really was an impression on me. And I think that for me, it gave me kind of more of a love of our nation and our
Mm-hmm.
patriotism and
Yep.
those things. It was kind of all in that same era of
Yeah.
seeing the world kind of, explode with this culture of the imagination, right? With Star
Uh-huh.
Wars,
Yeah.
but at the same time having this great level of patriotism embedded in me for our
Mm-hmm.
country. So
That's a
I
great
was just
point. Because I
curious.
remember we did like a bicentennial concert and we were all singing patriotic songs. And that was a huge thing. I had not thought about that till you brought it up. And then I
Yeah.
think we should definitely hope and pray for some semblance of that next year. It'll be our 250th anniversary next year. So let's hope
Yeah.
something happens.
Something incredible, right?
Yep.
So you were definitely interested in Star Wars. What other topics of interest were embedding themselves in you through your, you know, double digit years?
Yeah, that was because of my father, who did a lot of work in radio and television and communications. We were raised with something my dad called restless curiosity. So if you've ever
Mm.
met my dad, Suzanne, he's been with the Lord now for the last 6 years, but he would be super interested in your life story. He would be asking you all kinds of questions. Where were you raised? What did your parents do? What are you doing now? Tell me about that. How'd you get into homeschooling? And so
Yeah.
I was raised to have questions about everything. And my dad, if I didn't know what something meant, and I do this in my classes all the time. Somebody will ask me a question, and either if I don't know the answer or if I want them to dig, I'll just say, I'm going to quote my dad again, look it up. So my dad kind of forced us to be researchers, to look for answers,
Yeah.
which has really paid off for the rest of my life. But that was a really involved aspect of my teen years, and a work ethic, a strong Protestant work ethic. Take your work seriously, do the right thing, work really hard. But my parents were very social people too. So I think I had a really well-rounded teen years, and especially just trying to maximize my potential. It wasn't from a biblical perspective, like God made you in a certain way and you tap into that and be the best person that you can be for the Lord. But it was really great. They were very supportive. And even fast forwarding on to radio, I'm a uber conservative person. So my radio
Mm-hmm.
show for 16 years was uber conservative, but my dad was very liberal politically, which I didn't know
Hmm.
until later in life because he was a
Yeah.
Reagan Democrat. So I always assumed he was a Republican,
Yeah.
but he wasn't. But my dad listened to my radio shows, Suzanne, all the time. And I knew I was
Hmm.
upsetting him or making him mad most of that time. Yet he was still so supportive, and he would give me, good criticism just in how I did radio. I talked too fast, this, that, and the other thing. But he was so proud of me because I had the courage of my convictions. And so I grew up with a very, very supportive dad. All four of us in the Noble house knew dad was for us. He didn't always agree with us, but we knew he was for us. That was a big deal.
Yeah. Well, that's an important it's important for you to know that when you are getting ready to make big decisions about your life. I mean, going into high school or going into college, did you go to college? Did you pursue a degree in something, or did you kind of just know where you were going to land?
Well, being a kid growing up in his teen years in the 80s, the number one concern for me when I got out of high school in 1984 was I want to make as much money as I possibly can. Greed is good. It was Wall Street, Gordon Gekko, that whole mess. I actually wanted to fly
Yeah.
jets first, so I went through the whole process. I got accepted to the Air Force Academy, and then that spring I backed out. There was something about it that just kind of freaked me out, and I ended up going to University of Illinois for economics, business degree. And because I was like, well, if
That
I'm not going to fly jets, I'm going to make money.
that's so funny. Had you been interested in economics or history much during your high school years?
I hated history. Now I teach U.S. and world history, but I hated history in high school. I was just wanted to have fun. That's all I cared about. And I did some athletics, soccer and track and band. But I was just, I kind of lost that love. I was a good student. It was easy, but I didn't have any interest in history.
No interest. That was so funny you say that because I am a history major. I was a history teacher for 13 years.
Wow.
And hated it in high school. Could have cared less. And part of it was the way it was taught. To me, honestly.
Boring.
Yes, exactly. Historical fiction, historical related things I loved, but not actually learning in history class. So you went into economics. Well, that's an interesting jump. So how did that go for you?
Well, halfway through college, I was ready to be done with college because my older brother had worked for this big student house painting company headquartered in Chicago and made a lot of money as a college student and was doing pretty well after college. And so once I got into college, I went right to work for this company. It was called College Craft. And I started my first summer after my freshman year. I started as a painter on a team with 4 or 5 other college students. And I went through an advancement program. So 4 or 5 weeks into the summer, I had my own crew. I had my own trailer dealing with customers. And I made really good money when I was in college. And I did that for the rest of the summer. The second summer, I got into supervision. I didn't paint anymore. I had 5 teams of college students all over the northwest suburbs of Chicago. And back then, for me, like I said, Suzanne, it was all about making money. And today's dollars, I was making about $30,000 a year for that job in today's dollars.
Great. That's
while
great.
I'm a full-time student. I grew up around Christianity. I was not a Christian. I didn't become a Christian, an actual born-again biblical Christian until I was 28. So you take a lost person with a big personality and a lot of money, and that just spells trouble.
Yeah.
And so I didn't care about college for most of it. I just cared about making money.
Yeah. So did you end up with a degree?
I did. I got my bachelor's degree and got out of college and then started working for a big corporation. I hated that because I was a significant person at College Craft, the painting company. But when I got out of college and worked for a big company, I was nobody. And I didn't like that because I had a big enough ego. So I went back to College Craft and I actually worked there full time as a regional president for 6 years before we moved to North Carolina. And it was in Columbus, Ohio, where my wife and I both became Christians.
That's phenomenal. So tell me a little bit about your family.
Okay, so Gina and I were married in 92. I tell people we were equally unequally yoked. Neither one of us actually knew the Lord. We weren't Christians. She grew up Catholic. I grew up Protestant. But we both wanted to make a lot of money and have a lot of fun. And we went to high school together. We were a year apart. So we got married in 92. We became Christians in 94. We moved to Raleigh in 97. Our oldest, Hayden, who's now married, lives in San Francisco with his wife. He's in the video game industry. So he's 30, all the way on the other side of the country, which is painful. I don't like to find my iPhone. And then our next one down, our daughter Amelia, she's actually in Manhattan. She's in sports marketing. They both went to college. Number 3 is an interesting and challenging story. Clay, he's 24, married, has 3 kids. They live here locally. I talk about that at some of my sessions when I speak at homeschool conventions because that did not come about in a conventional way. And then our youngest daughter, you mentioned politics earlier, our youngest daughter is a junior at University of North Carolina at Wilmington. She likes politics. She's interned for a U.S. congressman and a member of our state Senate. And this fall semester, she's interning for U.S. Senator Ted Budd here in North Carolina. And she wants to move to D.C. as soon as she graduates. So I'm like, is it something we said? Our kids just take off. But they've been raised to think of the Lord can take you anywhere and do amazing things, and you got to go where you think he wants you to go. And so they've had a pretty
Right.
big look at the world, and they've traveled a lot. And so they had no qualms about leaving home.
And, I think that is because when you build a lot of confidence in your children to trust where God's going to take them, I think that's, sometimes hard on us as the
Yeah.
parents, because
Yes.
it's like,
Very.
don't take them too far.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I understand, but it's great to see them being used in the way that God's designed them to do what they're designed to do.
Yeah, and they're all in
For
a
him.
spiritual journey. I mean, the bookends, as we call them, the oldest and the youngest, are thriving. The
Hmm.
middles, and some people, if you have middles or people that listen have middles, will know middles sometimes can be
Yeah.
challenging. And that's where a lot of
Yes.
our challenges are with the middles. But God is good, and we try to be patient, and we trust that, they're all going to be walking with the Lord. They all know the Lord. They all are, I would say they're all saved. But,
Yeah.
everybody's on a journey. So are my students. It's a journey.
Yeah. Well, let me back up for a second then. And during the
Sure.
course of this period, when did you start doing talk radio? How did you get to that?
Well, I became what I would call a Christian activist, and a lot of that was political in 2004.
Hmm.
That was a pastor that came to our church who's now a member of Congress from North Carolina. And he preached a message on a Saturday night at a revival, a 3-day revival that just rocked my world. It was about Nehemiah going back to Jerusalem and rebuilding the walls. And when you realize there's an emergency, it requires immediate attention. And then he talked about the state of the nation and the culture. And,
Hmm.
and I was like, I own my own small business. I had a successful house painting company. We homeschool. I distanced myself from the culture and government as much as I could.
Hmm.
But that Saturday, I just came under huge conviction that I just was living for myself. And I was going to push my kids out into the world one day. And I didn't do anything to try to affect the world I pushed them into. And so literally that Sunday, Suzanne, I wrote on a response card, put it on the altar to be more outspoken for God's truth in the public arena. That's literally what I wrote.
Hmm.
And then a few weeks later, some strange circumstances came together. I ended up leading about 350 Christians into a Raleigh City Council meeting to protest something. And then that just birthed this crazy experience of being a political, cultural activist, kind of the culture war.
Hmm.
And then some guys that were in Christian radio started to hear me, and they had me on their radio show. It's a Truth Radio Network, which had some stations in Florida, actually. And
Yeah.
they're like, wow, Steve, you should have a radio show. And I'm like, that's a nice compliment. Thanks. You don't just get on the radio. Well, in Christian radio, you can actually buy your way on.
Just get in.
So I just had enough supporters and a board of directors, and we went out and raised money. In November of 2007, I started Called to Action This Week, which was on Saturdays. And 3 months later, I was on Sirius Satellite Radio. And I did Saturdays for 3 years, and I got off the air because I was frustrated. And then they pulled me back in a few months later, and I did daily starting in February of 2011 through December of 2023. It wasn't my idea.
It wasn't your idea. It's just one of those
Uh,
places you land. But
uh,
aren't like those places where you land sometimes that you never expected, are some of the most rewarding and most
oh,
interesting, places. Um, I
by
always
far.
tell people I never would have been at FPEA in the position I am if it had been in my brain to do that. Like that wouldn't have
Yes.
happened, right? So you were doing talk radio. Where and when did you come to the place where you started thinking about Noble U and teaching the next generation the civics and ethics?
Yeah.
When did that get birthed along
Well,
the way?
here we go again, Suzanne. If you talk to people I went to high school with and said, hey, one day Steve Noble is going to host a nationally syndicated Christian Bible thumper talk radio show. And then one day he's going to teach hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of high school students from that perspective, they would have thought you were drunk or on drugs or something,
Right.
because that is not who I was. But that's who God knew I would become. So just like radio, teaching was not my idea. My
Hmm.
wife and another homeschool mom in 2011 approached me and said, and I was doing Awana at church, so God gifted me in a way that stuff just worked well for me. And they said, we think that you should teach a government class. And as soon as they said it, I was like, yeah, because of all my political stuff. And I knew I was a good communicator. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. So the fall of 2012 is when I taught civics for the first time in a classroom at our church. I had 25 students, including our two oldest. And that's how that started. And
That's
then I
great.
did it. It made sense. It felt like an obligation. But it
Mm-hmm.
didn't take long, Suzanne, in the classroom to realize I really love doing it.
Mm.
And because of radio and I was a public person here in Raleigh, it was easy to add more students. And eventually, actually, the big church here in town that I just pulled up to, I have classes this afternoon. They have a huge homeschool community here, like 600 families. And so civics and Steve Noble in Raleigh, North Carolina just kind of fit like a hand in a
Went
glove.
together. Yeah.
And I just loved doing it. And then I worked on my master's degree in Christian ethics. And when I was finishing that, I started teaching Christian ethics, which is a master's level class for high schoolers.
Mm-hmm.
That's the deep end of the pool. It's the deepest subject matter I teach. And I started teaching that in like 2019. And then I decided to add U.S. history because it's such a cultural and political football in this country.
Oh, yeah.
And at this point, my love of teaching is growing. And I can see the value of spending my time several days a week with high schoolers as opposed to 5 days a week. And I'm doing radio at the same time. On the radio, I'm preaching to the choir, but in the schoolroom, I'm talking to a whole group of people that over the last 12, 13 years, I'm trying to be careful in how I say this. I'm rarely impressed by their theological knowledge, their understanding of the world around them, their understanding of the United States of America. And so it just became more of a burden and a love. And then I added world history a few years ago. And then Noble U is like right now, for example, here in Raleigh, I teach 12 in-person classes a week.
Mm-hmm.
I have 4 classes on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I'm very busy. But there's only so many classes I can teach, but I wanted to reach more teenagers and through them, their families. And that's when we decided we have to go online. So now we got to give this thing a name. And I have a good last name for it.
Yes,
so that's when we came up with Noble U in 2022 and built a website and started to figure out how do we do this online. And that's where Noble U started. It was just kind of the branding, making official what I was already doing. And then radio, it was just a matter in fall of 2023. Gina, my wife, asked a question after all those years on radio. She didn't ask very often. I came home after the show one day and I'd been teaching and she goes, how's the show going? I think she could sense something was off.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? I actually don't think it's going really well. I don't think the audience can tell because I've done 3,400 radio shows. I could show up 20 minutes before the show and go live and make a decent show out of it. But my heart was more in the classroom than it was in the studio. And that's when we began praying and having conversations with people I trust in my board. And I said, you know what? I'm teaching 8 classes a week and doing live radio 5 days a week. I don't really want to keep doing both. I don't think I should do both. Would you rather me preach to the choir or go after our teenagers? Because I'm not going to do both. And to a T, every person said, go after them. Go after the teenagers. So we made the decision. December 23rd, 2023 was my last radio show. And Gina, once again, asked me this spring when the spring semester was over. And I'm reading letters and notes from parents and emails and stuff. She goes, hey, honey, is this the most fulfilling thing you've ever done? And without hesitating at all, I said, by far. It's the most fulfilling, most important thing I've done. And I've done a lot of stuff, but nothing is as important as trying to reach our teens.
Well, reaching the next generation is just huge. On many levels, like you said, it's just there's so much in the culture. There's so much coming to them so quickly on social media and just everywhere that for them to be solid and well grounded is a feat. For parents, even homeschooling parents, to try to manage all of that on their own is tough. And a lot of the time for teenagers, I think to hear the perspective of someone else who is passionate about truth and liberty and freedom is important for them outside of their home. It's important to hear the voices of the other people who, really carry that passion with them and can communicate and bring it all together in a way that they get it. And I know it's interesting that you also have partnered with the Tuttle twins.
Mm-hmm. That is
Who,
interesting.
yeah, it's interesting because I know they're all about teaching the ideas of liberty and like true history and helping people to find truth in the mix of all of the garbage, right?
Yeah,
So
they're yeah, kind of first principles. Sorry, I interrupted you. What were
yeah,
you
no,
going to
that's
ask?
fine. Just how did you get connected with them to actually be part of their academy?
So, unbeknownst to me, a year ago, somebody from the Tuttle Twins team and
Mm-hmm.
her daughter were auditing my civics class online.
Okay.
So, Labor Day weekend, we're at a friend's house out near the coast, and I get this email. And she's like, "Hey, Steve, my daughter and I are auditing your class. We live in, I think they live in Ohio. And you're an incredible teacher. We love the way you teach and how you incorporate a biblical perspective. And so thanks for that. I happen to be the program director for the Tuttle Twins. And so we've got this thing called the Academy, which is, more mature teaching, deeper teaching, where we're actually using teachers and putting that stuff online. It's a subscription service because the Tuttle Twins stuff is more directed at younger kids. They don't
Right.
really have stuff for teenagers as they start maturing. I mean, some to a certain extent, but not directly.
Mm-hmm.
And so they started this online thing. So she said, "I know you're super busy. Would you have any interest in maybe doing a series for us on world history or U.S. history?" And I, of course, was very flattered about that. For Tuttle Twins has great content.
Yeah.
Tuttle Twins does not. They don't have a lot of religious content.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's kind of first principles. It's more of a. They mention the religious heritage of the nation, but it's definitely not the main thrust. It's
Right.
there, but it's not a big issue. And that was my first question for her. Is I said, "Well, you know how I teach, and I am a biblically centered, talking about Jesus kind of teacher, and that's not what
Mm.
you do.
Right.
And so, how are we going to deal with that?" And she said, "Well, we understand that, and I would not, and I know you wouldn't completely erase that. I would just ask you if you'd be willing to kind of, I don't think she said tone it down, but that was essentially it." And I was like, "Maybe, let's
Maybe.
keep talking." And so,
Okay.
but of course, Tuttle Twins is a huge platform. And in
Right.
terms of getting Noble U out there, I'm thinking my marketing side's like, this is a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
But my spirit side is like, yeah, I'm not going to compromise. And so we had that conversation. And I talked to my pastor about it and a few other people. And Tuttle Twins leadership comes from a different faith tradition than I do.
Yeah.
And so that was an issue. And then I said, okay. And then I started making slides and going through it, presenting what I was going to do to them. And they were fine with it. So if you
Great.
actually go to the Tuttle Twins Academy and watch What Can We Learn from American History with your
Mm-hmm.
teacher, Steve Noble, it's
Yeah.
probably the most evangelical thing on there. But
That's
they
great.
didn't change anything. I thought that was great. And if
Mm-hmm.
there's people going to Tuttle Twins Academy that really have never heard much about Jesus or don't know the biblical story or the gospel, and they like my classes there, maybe they'll take a Noble U class. And if you take a Noble U class, you're going to hear all that.
Then it's all there. Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
What
So
is
that's how that happened.
what is your favorite thing actually to teach? Where do you find that the kids really just get totally in sync and engaged? What's your
The,
favorite subject?
the class that they say, and a lot of them will say, this sounds self-aggrandizing and I don't mean it to.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of students will say the ethics class, which is one semester, was the most important class they took in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And because with my students that take other classes, U.S. history, world history, civics, when they take my ethics class, I tell them the first day, I said, first of all, you're going to find me to be a lot less playful in here
Mm-hmm.
because this content, especially when we start unpacking issues, abortion, transgenderism, euthanasia, all kinds of stuff, you're not going to find me as playful. This is the deep end of the pool. It's very emotional. It's spiritually very heavy. And you're going to notice, you're going to figure out that all of a sudden, the way that I taught all those other classes is based on this class.
Hmm.
So like Suzanne, I mentioned my dad earlier. When I had friends later in life that had gotten to know me and never met my dad, once they met my dad, they would
Mm-hmm.
kind of laugh and say, "Oh, it all makes sense now." I know where you get
That's
some of
awesome.
these aspects from. And when you take ethics with me, it'll all make sense. You'll know why I taught U.S. history, world history, and civics the way I did. Christian ethics drives everything. So that's the most meaningful class. I wouldn't say it's the most fun class. U.S. history is the most fun class, and civics too, because I talk about what's going on in the news all the time. But in terms of meaningful to me personally, definitely ethics.
When you're choosing your history class, like, who do you like to talk to them about as far as like American history figures? Who's inspiring to you, and like it really just shows through your teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in U.S. history, which is a 2-semester class, we start in the 1200s with Marco Polo to try to set the stage for why Europe was pushing in this direction. And then we do 34, 35 weeks studying essentially 400 years of American history. So it's almost like at a seminary, you would call that a survey class, an Old Testament survey, New Testament survey. And that's the way it is. What I tend to focus on in these classes is that the seeming contradictions that we find in a lot of American leadership, where you have founding fathers that owned slaves. We talk about the equality of man in the Declaration of Independence, yet slavery is still in existence. Thomas Jefferson writes a paragraph about slavery in his original version of the Declaration. There were 3 versions: his, the Committee of Fives, and then the Continental Congress. Then they pulled that out. And so I tell them, I teach U.S. history as a Christian first, as an American second. We're going to use what God's word teaches us about truth to look at our own history and to judge it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so anytime you have somebody that's willing to stand up against the curve and speak out and do the right thing. So whether it's, I'm trying to remember her name, Harriet Tubman, somebody like that, George Washington, who could have been made a king, but he didn't want to be.
Yeah.
People that really had that level of humility and a vision, I'll focus on them. But mostly this class isn't about individuals. It's about movements and about the different aspects of American history, isolationism, expansion, where we're at in the post 9/11 world. You know, a lot of U.S. history is marked by presidents. That's good and bad.
Right.
That we put so much weight on who the president is. Because as a Christian, there is another story at play, not just who's in the White House.
Right.
So I couldn't reduce how I teach U.S. history to people, places, or dates. It's all about movements and how do we look at our own history through a Christian lens. Because I'll make the case that I believe America is still the greatest nation in the history of the world. But like all of us as individuals, it's complicated.
It's complicated. Yeah.
There's things about Steve Noble that are awesome that I would be happy to share. And there's things about Steve Noble that I would never talk about on a podcast.
Yeah.
and that's the reality of our lives. And that's the reality of our country's life. I love the country. I'm a patriot. But my Christianity comes first. And so that's how I teach it.
That's phenomenal. I think that, you know, again, getting to the truth of our history and evaluating from whence we came, you know, and how we're moving, what the trajectory looks like.
Yep.
All of those things.
Which history helps you with.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, there's a certain path that's developing here.
Yeah. It is so important. And so I really appreciate what you're doing to educate the next generation, to inspire them, and, you know, to make them think about how they can step out and have an impact, right, on the world that they're going to be moving into. And I think that the work you do is of high value, very high value.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and one of the big things for them that I was terrible at myself, and then I'll shut up. This was a sermon from Tim Keller years ago, and especially doing politics and the culture war. He said in that sermon, if you're all truth and no grace, you're a bully. And that's what our generation struggled with in the culture wars. We're all truth and we struggle with grace. Our kids' generation, the current teen generation, they tend to be all grace and no truth.
No truth.
Which makes you a coward.
Yeah.
Right. It makes you a coward. And so in John chapter 1, verse 14, Jesus talking about himself, Jesus full of grace and truth. It's both. It took me a good 15 years for God to beat that into me. And so as I deal with politics and American history and all this stuff, grace and truth, grace and truth, grace and truth. And if you're going to call yourself a Christian, then apathy is not an option. You cannot sit on the sidelines. You have to care about your neighbor, and you have to care about God enough to do something about it. And so that's all in there. And all the
That's
Noble
great.
U classes, that's the deal. That's the epicenter of who I am and what I do.
That's fantastic. So I'm going to ask you, if you will, I know we're going to wrap this up here. Can you leave me with a quote, some motto maybe that, you dwell on that encourages you and inspires you, or the one that inspires the next generation?
Yeah, that's one that's deeply convicting for me, especially doing live radio and politics and stuff, is grace and truth. That's a big one. All grace. That the thing I just told you, all grace and no truth, and you reverse that. That's a big one. From a Christian perspective, like a passage of scripture has always been, and if you look at some of the stuff that I do, you'll see if I sign something, I'll put Galatians 2:20. I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live. It's not Steve Noble's life. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me, who loved me and gave himself for me. And it's I don't live in the flesh anymore. I try to live through the Spirit. Galatians 2:20 is about, you see that bumper sticker, Suzanne, God is my co-pilot. No, he's not. Get in the back of the plane where you should be. God is your pilot. So that's what Galatians 2:20 talks about, that I remind myself, okay, I've been crucified in Christ. It's no longer I who live. It's him who lives in me. And why? Why should I follow him? Because he loves me and gave himself for me. And so that kind of drives everything.
That's what I would leave you with. Gets us back to the truth, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Gets us back to the truth. Well, I appreciate you being with me today and just talking through these things. I think it's so interesting to learn about the background and the stories of the people that we know and interact with. And I appreciate you sharing because it's been very interesting and encouraging. And I look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
Yeah, hopefully I'll see you in Orlando next summer. I've already got my booth space. I'm ready to come down.
There you go.
Hope to share with as many people as I can.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Thanks for listening to the Not by the Book podcast from the Florida Parent Educators Association. To learn more about homeschooling in Florida or to find resources to help you on this amazing journey, visit our website at FPEA.com. If you have any suggestions for future guests, contact me, Suzanne, at notbythebook@fpea.com. Thanks again for listening, and be inspired to live your life not by the book.